Good morning, everybody. For those of you who are watching this online, I'm going to be putting our catechism lessons on the internet from now on so that you can get the information if ever you miss a class. However, as I've been telling the people here, watching this class online is no substitute for being present in the divine liturgy in terms of your spiritual development. So this is important for you to get the information, but it's not going to count towards your completion of the full round of catechism. Okay, let's get started. We're talking about today what is the Orthodox Church. Ostensibly, some of you are already members of the Orthodox Church, but most of you are here because you're interested in becoming members of the Orthodox Church, or at very least you're giving it a try. It makes sense to talk about, well, what is the Orthodox Church? What exactly am I getting myself into? Now, I said before, I promised that this class isn't just going to be all reading from a thing. Our last class was just reading from a packet. This class is going to be reading from a packet. These are the only lessons that are going to be like that. In the future, it's going to be a little more free form, but the information here is so important, I felt that this is just how we ought to begin it. So, what is the Orthodox Church? We're going to be reading this. By the way, this is from a book called The Faith by Clark Carlton. He is an Orthodox Christian philosopher. He's an American convert to Orthodoxy. I think he's severely underrated. I think he's very intelligent and has a very good grasp and way of explaining the church and the Orthodox point of view and everything. The book we're reading is called The Faith. It's on Amazon for $26 or something like that if you want to get it. However, you don't have you're not required to get that book and to read it for this. Everything, this class is completely free. Everything we're doing in here you can do with absolutely no charge. But if you wanted to, it's called The Faith by Clark Carlton. So, what is the Orthodox Church? The Orthodox Church is the original Christian church, established by our Lord Jesus Christ upon the foundation of the apostles, himself being the chief cornerstone and enlivened by the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost. So he always starts these chapters, I really like it, with a really concise statement. That right there is everything the chapter is going to tell you. It's right there in that little paragraph. But he's going to build it out. And this, I really wish Father Sam had been here for this lesson, because this starts out with the whole thing about Father Sam. Okay. In 1987, almost 2,000 evangelical Christians in various cities throughout the United States converted en masse to the Orthodox Church. Father Sam was the first. This was a movement called the Evangelical Orthodox Movement. Father Sam was the first in line, the first out of them to be chrismated, as he will happily tell you on many occasions. So I wish he would be here to tell us, but that's okay. He's in Danville right now. Since that time, several Protestant congregations have converted, as well as thousands of individuals. A church known for its antiquity and adherence to tradition is now one of the fastest growing Christian groups in America. And that holds true today. I mean, I think it waxes and wanes on and off, but if any of you were paying attention, about a year or two ago, the Washington Post ran an article, or the Wall Street Journal actually ran an article talking about how Orthodox Church was pretty much the only church to grow in the United States during COVID, when everyone else was declining. It's very interesting. So a church known for its antiquity and adherence to tradition is now one of the fastest growing Christian groups in America. What is the attraction to orthodoxy? Why are so many people leaving the religion of their upbringing to embrace this ancient faith? In 1794, monks from the Valam monastery in northwestern Russia were sent as missionaries to Russia and Alaska. There, for the first time, the peoples of North America heard the Christian gospel in all of its apostolic fullness. There, for the first time, converts were baptized and the Eucharist was celebrated in what is now the state of Alaska. So the Orthodox history in the United States goes a little deeper than that. There's a little bit of a competition between the Greeks and the Russians, because the Greeks, I think, actually founded the first church on the land of America, but it was for Greek immigrants who were brought there by some colonists because they thought they would be good workers. And so that was in Florida. So I don't know. The Greeks colonized America from Florida on up, and the Russians got it from Alaska on down, and we're going to meet in the middle at some point. But also, before that, during colonial times, there was actually an English colonist named Ludwell was the last name, who converted to Orthodoxy. And so he was really the first Orthodox Christian presence in America, although he wasn't a missionary. The Russians were the first missionaries. And huge portions of Alaska are still Orthodox among the various Inuit peoples up there. It's very interesting. No, it's okay, please. We're happy. Take this packet. We're going to be reading from it. So we're on the second or third paragraph down. Although Orthodoxy has been on the continent for 2 centuries, it remains little known. For many, it is simply an exotic Eastern version of Roman Catholicism. For others, it is mainly associated with Greek or Russian or Middle Eastern food festivals. A great many more Americans do not even realize that the Orthodox Church exists. So, Kate, I'm sorry, you're being recorded right now. It's not it's not intentional that we set it up this way, but there's just not room. Perhaps the greatest tragedy in all of this is that many Orthodox Christians themselves do not know much about their faith. It is not unheard of for an Orthodox Christian to describe his faith as Catholicism without the Pope. It's somewhat understandable. America grew up really with just two forms of religion. You had Catholicism and Protestantism. And when there's a form of Christianity that is really the original form, but it doesn't fit into that binary, people just don't know what to do with you. Or actually, so I walk around in my robes. A lot of people lately have been saying "Salam Alaikum" to me. So I've been wearing my cross more because not to insult anyone, but it's that's mistaken identity. There is, of course, a reason for this unfortunate situation. Although the first priests in North America came here specifically as missionaries, we was talking about the Alaskans, the vast majority of Orthodox churches in the continental United States were founded by immigrants from Greece, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. For the most part, these Christians worshipped in the language of their mother country. This helped to insulate the community from the wider American society, and as a result, insulated society from the treasures of the church. This is true. This is an unfortunate fact of when we came here. We were, very many of our ancestors were more concerned at preserving what they had rather than sharing it with anyone else. But so be it. We're moving forward now. With the mass conversion of the Evangelical Orthodox in 1987, however, the cat was out of the bag. The Orthodox Church is experiencing a great renewal in this country. Of course, it's very old when he's writing this. It's almost 30 years ago. No, more than 30 years ago. Not only are thousands of Americans turning to the Orthodox Church as their true spiritual home, many of those reared in the church have rediscovered the rich treasure of orthodoxy. I'm part of that latter category. I was, baptized as a baby, as a Greek, but I discovered my faith when I was a teenager. I didn't grow up going to church or anything like that, and I realize, everything's here. Everything that I was looking for was in the faith of my heritage. And you can say, oh, well, that's awfully convenient for you. You didn't have to convert. It's true. I understand that you could look at that and make that perspective, but I think it's really true. I think orthodoxy really is true, and I just, hit the jackpot, in terms of being born. But anywho, so a lot of people are converting, but a lot of people are just, from an Orthodox background and discovering it for themselves. The reason for this renewal is clear. People are finding in Orthodoxy the fullness of their apostolic faith. Tired of following this new religious leader or that new fad, they're looking for a church with deep historical roots. They're also tired of having the doctrinal rug pulled out from them by their own pastors and bishops. They're looking for a faith that does not change with the weather. People are hungry for genuine worship, a real encounter with God, and not merely a lecture, an emotional pep rally. Finally, people are looking for evidence of genuine sanctity. They want a religion that makes a difference in their lives, not just an interesting theological system. And that is something, that first point, by the way, is something I did want to talk about. They're tired of having the doctrinal rug pulled out from under them by their own pastors and bishops. A lot of people come here from Protestant denominations because they've compromised. It seems that they don't even believe in anything, so why are they teaching it to other people, whether it's related to, doctrines related to gender or sexuality, or you just have a priest who said, oh yeah, there was no virgin birth, or, the resurrection is just a metaphor or something. It's okay to come here if you are disappointed with the church of your heritage. That is an okay reason to come here. But the reason to stay here is because the truth is here, and not because you're dissatisfied with something else, you understand? You can come to the Orthodox Church for negative reasons, but you can't stay here. You have to, the key thing is going to be discovering that Christ is here. It's not, I have met people, unfortunately, I think most people who convert to Orthodoxy get it and are here for the right reasons, but I have met a couple people in my life who are just, oh, I'm so mad that everyone's so liberal now. And it's like, that's not the reason to be here. Liberal, conservative, whatever, it's not about labels, it's not about, which team you're on or whatever, it's about Christ. It's about eternal life. It's about spiritual reality. It's totally respectable and understandable to be disappointed with what's going on in the world, but it's not. Orthodoxy is not a negative thing. It's not an absence of something. It's the presence of something. The Orthodox Church is all of this and more, for she is nothing less than the Church, founded by our Lord Jesus Christ. Although the Orthodox Church judges the soul of no man, leaving judgment solely to God, she does claim that she, and she alone, is the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church confessed in the Nicene Creed. And hopefully all of you got a copy of the Nicene Creed, and we'll go in a little bit to that today if we have time. So the claim of the Orthodox Church to be the one and only true church is based upon four factors. The Orthodox Church has maintained an unbroken historical continuity with the original church founded by Jesus in Jerusalem. 2. The Orthodox Church has faithfully maintained the apostolic faith once delivered to the saints, Jude chapter 3, neither adding nor subtracting from it. 3. The Orthodox Church faithfully worships God the Father in spirit and in truth, providing mankind with personal access to the life and grace of the All-Holy Trinity. And 4. The Orthodox Church has produced untold numbers of saints throughout the centuries, persons who bear within themselves the uncreated grace of God. That's very significant. We'll get to that. We'll get to each of these. So number 1, historical continuity. Compared with European countries, the United States is a relatively young nation. For most of us, however, this fact goes unnoticed. Indeed, anyone who visits Philadelphia or Williamsburg gets a definite sense of American history. It is not until one travels to Europe and climbs around castles built centuries before Columbus's voyage, or perhaps stays in an inn built decades before the American Revolution, that one begins to realize just how young our country really is. It is the same with religion. The typical American Christian has very little, if any, historical consciousness. He may know a few things about the history of his denomination, but it is not until he is confronted with a church of great antiquity that he begins to consider the origins of his own faith. When encountering the Orthodox Church, the Protestant Christian comes face to face with a form of Christianity 3 times as old as his own. By 3 times as old, he means the Protestant Reformation began around 1519 in Europe. So that's 1500 years. The Orthodox Church at that point in time was 1,500 years old. So the math works out. Okay, so any Protestant denomination is 500 years old, whereas the Orthodox Church was already 3 times that at the inception of the Protestant movement. It really is, even 1,500 years, to say nothing, of millions or tens of millions of years. 1,500 years is very hard to wrap your mind around. It's so many generations, and you haven't even lived one generation, The origin of most Protestant denominations can be traced back to 1 or 2 founders. Thus, the Lutheran Church is traced back to Martin Luther, the Reformed Church to John Calvin, the Presbyterian Church to John Knox, the Methodist Church to the Wesleys, although they never actually left the Anglican Church, and the Churches of Christ to Barton Stone and Alexander Campbell. Although Baptist churches cannot claim one founder, their history is traceable through the English separatist movement back to the Church of England. In every case, the trail stops dead in the 16th century with the Protestant Reformation. The Orthodox Church, in contrast, traces its history back to the 1st century of Jerusalem, founded by Christ himself. The Church is fully conscious of this history. Indeed, she celebrates it, marking important events in her history throughout the year with the special celebrations. When we mean by that is when the Orthodox Church traces direct continuity, the physical form that takes is the leaders of the Orthodox Church are called bishops. So, a priest is the head of a church. I'm the head of Holy Trinity, but I'm beneath a bishop. A bishop is head of, a region. So our bishop is the Bishop of New Jersey, His Eminence Metropolitan Apostolos, and he rules over 48 churches up the middle of the East Coast, let's say. So from here, we're the furthest south and the furthest west, all the way up to New Jersey. So the real heads of our church are bishops. We have no pope. There's no one leader. No one man speaks for God in the Orthodox Church. But every bishop was ordained by a bishop through the laying on of hands, was ordained by a bishop, back to one of the apostles that Jesus Christ commissioned. So the bishop who made me a priest through ordination himself was made in the line, His Eminence Archbishop LP the Flores of America ordained me to the priesthood, and he was ordained by a bishop who was ordained by a bishop back to the Apostle Andrew. Most of the Greek and Russian derived churches trace back to Andrew, and we have the receipts to prove it. You can go on the Ecumenical Patriarch website. It might not be on the English version of the website, but it's on the Greek version of the website that you can see. Okay, this bishop, then this bishop, then do. So yes.
Actually, you just said what is a patriarch?
So a patriarch is just a bishop who has a particularly old or special see. So we call if there is a top dog in our jurisdiction, he's the Patriarch of Constantinople. But he's referred to primus inter pares. He's the first among equals. So he's not inherently of more worth than any other bishop, even though he has a seat of honor. And even then, there are many more than one patriarch. So there's a Patriarch of Constantinople, a Patriarch of Antioch, a Patriarch of Jerusalem, a Patriarch of Alexandria, a Patriarch of Moscow, a Patriarch of Bulgaria. Even our patriarchs can't be considered as Orthodox popes, but it's a good question. A patriarch is a bishop, but maybe like a bishop with a little extra honor, a little extra oomph. A cooler hat. Yeah. but not inherently more of a bishop than the other bishops.
And so just to
No,
wrap that up,
these are good
so
questions.
there's no cardinals. It's
Yeah, no, the cardinals. That's are in theory. I think they're advisors to the pope, and that office just doesn't exist. It's you don't if you don't have a pope, you don't need cardinals. To my knowledge, I mean, I'm not an expert in Roman Catholicism, but the concern with it, that's what we mean by direct institutional continuity. There was never a break. There was never a time when we were cut off from the apostles and had to start from scratch. We just kept going. This concern with history is an important element of the Orthodox faith, for it underscores the fact that the Church is an historical community. When Christ ascended to heaven, he did not leave behind a system of philosophy or a school. He left his church, which was a concrete historical community there in Jerusalem. From Jerusalem, the Christian gospel spread throughout the known world, and the local churches were created. All these local churches, however, sprang from and were dependent on the original church in Jerusalem for their faith and practice. So, our local church, if you want to call it the local church, is the metropolis of New Jersey, of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America, of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. So that's our local church, if you want to call it, is the metropolis of New Jersey of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. It's a mouthful, but we have a weird jurisdictional situation in the United States. So we're going to solve it. We're on our way to solving it, but that's what it is. Christianity is not a philosophy. It's not a set of rules that one may follow on one's own. It is a life which can only be lived in a community in the church that Christ himself founded. So part of you being an Orthodox Christian means you're coming to church. That's why I started to only do these classes on Sundays. And what happens in the church, in our prayer, is the most important part of your being an Orthodox Christian. But you being here right now or in the coffee hour matters. It's part of your journey. You don't have to be best friends with everyone, and you don't have to go even know everybody's name, but you have to have something to do with the church, or else what are you doing, So our Lord made it perfectly clear that this church would overcome our Lord made it perfectly clear that this church would overcome the gates of hell itself. So the question that faces the modern Christian is, what community is the authentic church? The Orthodox Church of today does not imitate the original Christian community. She is that community. When evangelical Orthodox and Father Sam first began their pilgrimage for evangelical Protestantism to Orthodoxy, they called themselves the New Covenant Apostolic Order. They tried as best they could to make the communities like the church they read about in the New Testament. As the years went on, however, they realized that imitation was not enough. They found that the church they were trying to imitate still existed, and the authentic Christianity could be lived only within her embrace. The historical continuity of the Orthodox Church, therefore, is the first pillar of her claim to be the one authentic Church of Christ. Others may try to imitate the Church of the New Testament, some more closely than others, but no Protestant denomination can claim an organic unity with her. So, this is significant. When you have a new denomination, like, why did the Protestant Reformation happen? Was because everyone was Catholic, and they looked around and they said, there really must be a true Christianity, but this is not it. Something has to change. We need to recapture the original. And that's why Catholicism gave birth to Protestantism. And Protestantism, every time a new denomination is founded, is because there has to be a real Christianity, but what I'm doing right now isn't it. I need to recapture something else. No such movement ever happened in the history of the Orthodox Church. In fact, when big breakaways happened in the Orthodox Church, it was for the opposite reason. So the biggest recent split it was whenever whenever the leadership tried to change something in the Orthodox Church too significant, it caused a rift in the church. So the most recent one was in 1924 when we adopted a new calendar. So when we decided to get on the Gregorian calendar, actually not the Gregorian calendar, the revised Julian calendar, which modeled off the Gregorian calendar, it caused a split. Now there's an old calendar, a new calendar movement. The old calendar movement's more or less dead, but it did split. And then before that was in the 1600s, there's the Old Believer movement. So it caused a huge rift in the Russian church when they tried to change the sign of the cross from 2 fingers, which they were using back then, to 3 to get in line with the Greeks. Division, like a lot of bloodshed and violence, really, really chaotic. So what I'm trying to say is, in the West, people keep inventing new forms of Christianity because they're not happy with what they have. In the Orthodox Church, we have the opposite problem, where if you try to change, we're so happy with what we have, when you try to change anything at all, people freak out and rise up in arms. But that does kind of tell you something about the mentality, something about, again, it's not, you don't want to be like rigidly sclerotically conservative. Nothing can ever change for any reason at all. There are reasons to change. There are reasons to do things differently. I know people who go on missionary trips out to Kenya or something where the Orthodox Church is growing, and they'll like dance during the Divine Liturgy. Sometimes they're happy. They say if you dance in Holy Trinity, I'm going to be upset with you. Please don't do that. But there are times and places where that's an authentic expression of faith for those people. That's something you can accept. The Orthodox Church is not about just rigidly always doing the same thing every time, but it's about, it's like gardening. You create boundaries so that healthy growth can happen. And the boundaries are very important, but the growth has to be organic. You don't just force it. It's not a machine that you just build. Anywho, okay. So the Orthodox Church exists in historical continuity. We've only covered one thing so far of the four things. Does anyone have any questions about that so far? Yes.
Do you believe without Martin Luther and King Henry VIII that the split that happened within the Roman Catholic Church, you think it would have stayed the same, or you think that it would have split eventually anyway without those two in history?
My guess, and I'm really not an expert on Western Christianity because I've never been a Western Christian, is that whatever the Roman Catholic Church lost, it lost already in 1054. The problems began at that point in time. So if the Protestant Reformation didn't happen, some other rift would have occurred. I think so. Yes.
How many bishops are there? Like, are there like a lot of bishops, more than like
or
patriarchs?
There are several hundred.
Mm-hmm.
I know in Russia they're like 300-400, and so that's the biggest Orthodox country.
Are there still like, at least laying on of hands? It wasn't just to like one person, but it could be to multiple. Like, for example, like Peter, did he like lay down his hands on like to multiple people? Or
yeah. So Andrew. And so, for instance, Andrew made the first line of bishop because each apostle got a different territory. So Andrew got all of Greece, Bulgaria, Russia, all sort of separately from him. Whereas the ones more in the Middle East, I think, are traced back to Paul and Mark. I think I can't really remember because it's not the tradition I'm coming from. So each apostle ordained multiple people. So there might be multiple threads. They usually run through a particular city or something. In our case, through Constantinople. Yes?
I was just going to say, if anybody doubts that the history of the church, you can get the complete audiobook of the Didache on YouTube, which dates to about 70 AD, which was before Revelation was even written. And that is a manual of how the churches were literally set up in the church homes and the eventual church buildings. And it's the same thing we do today.
That's good. Yeah, the Didache is an ancient Christian document that was uncovered. I think it was discovered sometime in the 1800s. But some of the early Christian worship manuals, and it's not exactly identical to what you see in the modern day, but it shows that it's very strong continuity between Orthodoxy as it was now and Orthodoxy as it was 2,000 years ago.
Certainly closer than laser shows.
Yeah. Okay, so the Orthodox Church preserves. We said we're going over four things, right? It preserves historical continuity. Number two, it preserves apostolic doctrine. So historical continuity by itself, however, is never enough to ensure that a community is the true church. The Orthodox Church is the true church of Christ not only because she can trace her history uninterruptedly back to the New Testament, but also because she has faithfully maintained the authentic teaching of the apostles, neither adding to nor subtracting from it. The Roman Catholic Church can also claim an unbroken historical succession from the time of the apostles down to today. Yet Rome has changed the teaching of the early church on important issues and added strange doctrines of its own invention. So that's true. Everything I said about ordination in the Orthodox Church, it does apply in the Catholic Church. But we believe that it's not just about the historical continuity, it's about the faith. And there are big things you can point to and say, wow, they changed that. Did you have a question, Jackson? Okay. For these reasons, the Orthodox Church is not in communion with Rome, there being no unity of life without unity of faith. In the 11th century, the Church of Rome was officially altered the Nicene Creed. So this is what precipitated the Great Schism in the year 1054. That's when. Before that, there was only one church. We refer to as the Orthodox Church. Some people have used the term Great Church of Christ, but before the year 1054, there was only one church. And then the Roman Catholic Church, we would say, broke away from us. In the 11th century, the Church of Rome officially altered the Nicene Creed. This alteration had been refused by popes until that time. When, however, the alteration was made official, the Church of Rome no longer confessed the same faith as the early church. Yes?
So, when prior to 1054, when I'm reading and they refer to somebody as a pope,
Mm-hmm.
I thought we didn't have popes. That's what I'm kinda confused
Okay,
about.
so we have no popes in the sense of we have no one ultimate authority.
Mhm.
There are people, the just like the bishop of Constantinople is referred to as a patriarch, the bishop of Rome was always referred to as a pope for a long time, and the bishop of Alexandria, who's still Orthodox, is also referred to as a pope. So we do have a pope in terms of the name, but he's not the leader. If he, he's not infallible. You don't have to do everything he says. But
He
he's
does not have like ex cathedra authority.
Exactly. But there is, and he actually has this insane title. So the Pope of Alexandria in the Orthodox Church has like Pope and Patriarch of Alexandria and Judge of the Universe. Like it adds, yeah, it's totally like some of the very, because the Orthodox Church has been around so long. Some of these sees, like these episcopal seat, like seats of bishops, they get these insane titles on them. They get really long. So the Pope, the Patriarch of Alexandria, is also called the Pope and the Judge of the Universe, but he doesn't actually have an authority that you would expect the Judge of the Universe to wield. Anyway,
The
yeah.
schism, what the main issue in the schism of 1054 was the what was it called?
Filioque.
Filioque.
So there were three issues that led to the split with the Catholic Church. The first was that they changed the Nicene Creed. They added a brief little clause that says "and the Son," and it makes a whole bunch of different. So we'll get into that when we go over the Nicene Creed. Number two, what they changed is they had a pope. Basically, the Pope of Rome, who we always considered a legitimate bishop, he started trying to boss the other bishops around, and our guy said no. We're equal. And the Pope didn't see it that way. So that was another change, is that they went from having what we call conciliar authority in the Orthodox Church. Authority is distributed because only Christ is the true authority. They went from saying, no, there's actually one man who can speak for Christ. He's the vicar of Christ on earth, and he's the Pope. And we said no. So first they changed the creed. Second, they added a Pope. And third, they started using unleavened bread in their services. That was a big deal for people back then, but we use leavened bread, and that's a more obscure issue. And people in the modern day will be like, well, that shouldn't matter. We'll get into why it did matter and why it was very important, especially for people in the Middle Ages. But these were the three things: the filioque cause, the Pope, and the leavened bread. We're about to get there. Okay. Another difference between the Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches concerns the authority of the Pope. From the 11th century on, the papacy made increasingly bold claims to sovereignty over the entire church, including other patriarchs. So he, started bossing others around, basically. Claims never accepted by the Eastern bishops and never affirmed by an ecumenical council. So even though he would try to boss them around, they would never oh yeah, this is cool. This trend reached its apex with the First Vatican Council in the 19th century. This Roman Council decreed as a dogma of the Roman Catholic Church that the Pope is infallible when he speaks ex cathedra in his official capacity as the Pope. That's very dangerous from our point of view, to ever say that a human being can speak with the full authority of God. We do say we have saints even in the modern day who can maybe give us certain messages from God, but to take that extra step and say not only that they're speaking on behalf of God, but they're utterly infallible in doing so is very weird territory and should make us all uncomfortable. The idea that any one individual in the church is infallible is blatantly absurd. Clark Carlton does not mince words. In the early church, when problems arose over doctrine or discipline, the apostles and later the bishops whom they appointed met together in councils to decide these issues. In Acts 15, we read of the first church council, which was held in Jerusalem. The question was raised whether Gentile converts to Christianity should be circumcised. Peter, Paul, and Barnabas addressed the assembly. Then James, the bishop of Jerusalem, summed up the proceedings and issued a judgment with which all agreed. They announced their decisions with the words, "It seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us." So the practice of Orthodox authority being distributed in councils, it goes back to the Bible, to Acts 15. That's how the apostles decided things. When a big issue came up, they got together, and Peter did not preside. Notice that Peter was present. Peter was not acting as Pope at that point in time, but actually James, the Bishop of Jerusalem, passed the final decree. No individual or member of the church can lay special claim to the Holy Spirit. Issues have always been decided in the whole body of the church meeting in council. The spirit of collegiality, in Russian sobornost, is the church's safeguard against heresy, for many bishops have gone astray and taught heresy. Patriarch Nestorius of Constantinople was deposed and condemned as a heretic by the Third Ecumenical Council. Pope Honorius of Rome in the 7th century was condemned as a heretic by the Sixth Ecumenical Council. These were legitimate bishops of the Orthodox Church who have been condemned by the Orthodox Church. The fact that he was a pope or a patriarch did not stop him from being condemned. Interestingly, until the 11th century, when papal claims began to snowball, all popes had to affirm their allegiance to the Sixth Council and its condemnation of Pope Honorius as part of their oath of office. So this is another way in which the Catholic Church trained. Previously, they were willing to condemn popes when the popes had gone wrong, and then after a certain point in history, they stopped doing that. Church history is a messy business. It is full of heresies and schisms. Sometimes these issues took centuries to resolve. The Orthodox Church makes no attempt to sweep this under the rug. There is no attempt to pretend that Nestorius was not Patriarch of Constantinople. He was, and he was a heretic. The point, however, was that he was deposed from office and his teachings were condemned. The Orthodox Church teaches the same things today she did in the year 1000, the same things she taught in the year 100. There is a perfect continuity of faith and life. This is easily contrasted not only with the novel teachings of the Roman Catholic Church, but with the doctrines of the various Protestant denominations. All Protestant sects have changed considerably since their foundings. Many denominations do not even teach the same things they taught 50 years ago, much less 400 years ago. It's safe to say, for example, that John Wesley would not recognize much of what goes on today by the name of Methodism. E.Y. Mullins, one of the most prominent Baptist theologians of the 20th century, once said that theology had to be reinvented every generation. This is absolute nonsense. So again, Clark Carlton, he does not pull punches. The Apostle Paul warns of those who would change the message of the gospel and clearly commands us, "Therefore, brethren, stand fast and hold to the traditions which ye have been taught, whether by word or our epistle." So this, by the way, is an important text in the Bible that shows there were traditions that the apostles handed on that weren't written down. So, for instance, the Divine Liturgy, didn't really get written down until the 300 years after Christ, or various practices like the Jesus Prayer and the sign of the cross. Maybe one of the biggest ones that we know is very, very ancient, but it wasn't written down anywhere. It was just what the Christians were doing. The Orthodox Christian is not free to believe whatever he wants to believe or interpret the Holy Scripture in whatever way strikes his fancy, nor are bishops free to teach whatever they want. All are called to accept and live by the apostolic tradition, which has been handed down uncorrupt from the first century till today. So this is the Orthodox Church. It preserves historical continuity as an organization, but also the same faith. Do we have any questions about that? Keeping in mind that throughout later classes we're going to go over specific doctrines, so I don't want to get too in weeds of, well, this or that doctrine, was that a development or change? Was there any question, just preliminary questions? Yes.
I do kind of have a question. So, when the church, when we split, because, I know there's Coptics and Catholics, is, at that moment when we split, did that church automatically become not the church, or was it already question. Not the church, and they had to decide whether or not,
That is an extremely good question. And so did when the Catholic Church broke from the Orthodox Church, did grace just immediately withdrawn? God was just gone from them. And the short answer is, I think there is sort of a nuanced view you can take of it, because when the schism first happened and the Catholic and Orthodox churches broke apart from each other, the people there at the time did not have a sense of this is the final ultimate break. There was always the sense of we're gonna sort this out and come back together. So in a lot of the borderlands between Catholic and Orthodox lands, for centuries you had people intermingling between the two churches and taking communion at both churches. So it was a more and more gradual process until it was actually only a few hundred years later at one of the councils we decided, okay, if you were a Catholic, you had to be received now through the ceremony of chrismation. We no longer accept Catholic confirmation like we used to. So it was a gradual process. And you can see it, I think, throughout the history of the Catholic Church. They were producing saints who looked a lot more like Orthodox saints for centuries after they split. And now it's only when you get to the modern day where the modern Catholic saints are, for the most part, really unimpressive. So I think there was like something residual there that carried them quite a long way, but they kept throwing things overboard. You know what I mean? And so my guess was be in some ways it was maybe was instant, but in other ways it does seem like it was gradual, even centuries long. And so if you were, I don't know, living in Spain in the year 1054 and the Pope and Patriarch separated, you were immediately outside the church. You know what I'm saying? Because you were so far away. You were. It's my guess. It's not a dogmatic statement on behalf of the Orthodox Church.
I do have like a follow-up
Yeah.
question. What do you say when you come into contact with like you learn about like Catholic miracles or
Yeah.
even Coptic miracles that are like,
Yeah.
happening today still? Or like what do you say?
I mean, you know, with all supernatural, with all things that appear supernatural, there are three things it can be. It can be from God, it can be from the devil, or it can be, you know, manufactured by man, or just psychological. You know, it would come down to like the specific miracle. What happened? Is it absolutely completely impossible that any miracle ever happened in a Catholic context? I wouldn't be surprised if there's some Catholic miracles that really are from God. But what I'm saying is, and we can flesh this out later, is there are no saints the quality of like Saint Paisios or Elder Frem in the Orthodox Church, where people like would just, I'm talking about men who lived in the modern day and women.
Yeah.
People walked up to them and they knew their names instantly, and they could tell them something about their future, or they were seen levitating above the ground and shining with light. Like that doesn't happen in the Catholic Church anymore the way it does in the Orthodox Church. So that's what I'm saying. So they can have miracles here and there. You know, as Father Seraphim Rose says, you know, you can find bits of grace here and there because God didn't cease to exist, and He doesn't, you know, it doesn't just reject them outright. But there is something deeply lacking. And I would recommend just like reading a little bit about recent Catholic saints. And I don't mean to be rude. Like I'm not trying to like insult or, yeah.
Is that? I'm not sure, but is that kind of like going into when it talks about like being lukewarm in a sense, like when in Revelation, like
it could be. I don't know,
or not exactly.
I don't know if it applies. Again, I'm not an expert in Catholicism. What little digging I have done into the tradition, like you know, you read about Mother Teresa and something. It sounds like she was a righteous woman who really served the poor, but she wasn't like supernaturally transformed the way these various modern saints were, and there are so many in the Orthodox Church, even though we're much smaller in terms of population numbers. She was just a good woman who served the poor, but she was, you know, she wasn't, you know, didn't work miracles, wasn't clairvoyant, wasn't, you know, her relics weren't incorrupt or anything.
That's all the saints that we share with the Catholic Church as well.
Yeah.
Like St. Patrick.
Yeah, so any saint before the year 1054 is shared by both churches. That's true.
When did the Oriental Orthodox Church split off?
In the 300s, so like way before. Okay. Now they are an interesting situation, and we'll get into that because he's talking about the Coptic Church and the Ethiopian Church, who sometimes go by the term Orthodox, even though they're not in communion with us. They have had a movement in the last 2 centuries that has brought them closer to us. So that's what makes them appear a lot similar.
I think recently there's another like discussion between
and
the two.
Yeah, and there was in the 80s. We tried to come back together, and it didn't work out because of problems on their end. But anyway, it's an interesting thing. They are in some ways closer to us than anyone else, but they're not part of the Orthodox Church at the same time. But again, does that mean that God's totally abandoned them, that they're all completely hellbound sinners? You know, I don't know. Like, you know, it's not for me to decide. I don't even know if I'm going to heaven. Like, Lord have mercy. I'm not trying to judge or condemn anyone. Okay, right worship. The word Orthodox means both right belief and right glory, or worship. For the Orthodox, worship and doctrine are inseparable. The proper worship of God must be rooted in a proper understanding of who He is. Conversely, a flawed understanding of God will inevitably lead to improper worship, which insults rather than glorifies the All-Holy Trinity. When God gave the law of Moses to the people of Israel, He not only gave the 10 Commandments as an ethical guide, He also gave very specific instructions as to how He was to be worshipped. So we're talking about the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. If you get into Leviticus, you know, you're getting into very excruciatingly detailed accounts of how worship ought and ought not to be offered to God. It mattered. He also, failure to follow these rules could have terrible consequences, as Korah and his followers discovered when they illegally offered incense. The ground opened up and swallowed some, while others were consumed by fire from heaven. And Eleazar the priest took the brazen censers wherewith they that were burnt had offered, and they were made broad plates for a covering of the altar, to be a memorial unto the children of Israel, that no stranger which is not the seed of Aaron come near to offer incense before the Lord, that he was not as Korah and as his company, as the Lord said to him by the hands of Moses. not I've not read that passage in a while, but basically, some of the people of Israel were upset that only Aaron and his descendants could be priests on behalf of Israel while wandering in the desert, and they said, "No, we're going to take the priesthood, and we want spiritual authority for ourselves, and we want to offer the incense, and we want to be do this and that," and they died because they did it without God's blessing. So
a scary passage. It's like 150 people that the ground just
Yeah.
opened up and they.
Yeah, so it matters. Proper worship of God, it's not arbitrary. It's not, just do whatever feels right. It matters according to the Bible. The ministers of the Old Testament were not set apart to minister to the people, but to God, who was objectively present in the tabernacle and later the temple. This concept of ministry was adopted by the New Testament church, which was, after all, composed entirely of Jews. The early church adopted, with appropriate changes, the Jewish liturgical day, beginning at sundown, at set times of prayer, the yearly calendar of fasts and feasts, and more importantly, the belief that worship is a sacrifice directed towards God. So in the Orthodox Church, we didn't just throw out like the book of Leviticus and everything, but we no longer offer flesh and blood sacrifices at the temple in Jerusalem. We offer the bloodless sacrifice of bread and wine. So our worship is actually, if you want to get into the nitty gritty of it, we don't have time here, but our worship is patterned on what happened in the Old Testament because God gave those rules for a reason. And that's why, everything is so intricate and ornate in the Orthodox Church, is because we're following the patterns once laid down to us. Since the time of the Protestant Reformation, however, the idea of worship is a sacrifice and administration, and it's to God primarily. It's to God. And so sometimes people will ask, I'll do a weekday divine liturgy where 4 people show up. And people ask, well, why'd you even bother doing liturgy that day? No one came. And it's like, well, it's first and foremost to God on behalf of the community. It's good that people came. It's good that people prayed there. But it was about Him first, and then it's about us. So even if the church is empty, we're going to offer divine liturgies on holy days because that's our duty, and that's my duty as a priest. But it's not just me individually against the world. It's me on behalf of all of you. That's why you participate in the church. Even when you're not there on Sunday, you contribute to the upkeep of church because that's part of your worship and your offering towards God. I'm just the agent who's affecting that offering.
People are not the priority.
Right. And they're not
secondary.
They're, yes, I mean people are very, very, very important. But the first thing is God, and then people. Yeah.
And the church is never empty.
That's true, and the church is filled with all the saints and the angels at all times. That's true. The idea of worship as a sacrifice and ministration unto God has been gradually replaced with the notion of congregation-centered worship, where the clergy minister to the people rather than to God. The result is a plethora of worship services, which range from dry lectures to variety show productions to religious pep rallies. The basic pattern of Orthodox services, on the other hand, has not changed substantially since their inception. To be sure, as the Church went from a persecuted sect to a legalized religion, and finally the official religion of the Roman Empire, the services became more elaborate and complicated. So the original divine liturgies, celebrated underground and hidden. They weren't as they are now with a silver-plated gospel book and a whole bunch of altar boys, because they had to be in secrets, because you couldn't build the church. You had to move from place to place. If you were just in one concrete location, the Romans could bust down your door and burn it down. So certain things did develop and change, but the core of it was always the same. It is only natural that the services conducted in a great cathedral like that of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople would be more elaborate than those conducted in secret in a believer's living room in Judea. However, the basic structure remained the same. The Divine Liturgy celebrated in Orthodox Church today is structurally the same services as that described in Justin the Philosopher in the year 150. So this is a really important document. This is one of the only documents we have that describe in some level of detail what the early Christians were doing for worship underground, and it is a divine liturgy. And on the day which is called the Sun's Day, there is an assembly of all who live in the town or country, and the memoirs of the apostles or the writings of the prophets are read as much as time permits. So that's the gospel. The memoirs of the apostles are the gospels. So the first half of the liturgy, you read the gospel. And when the reader is finished, the presiding priest. My official title is presiding priest, so I'm the president of this church. The president gives a discourse, admonishing us and exhorting us to imitate these excellent examples. So the first half of the liturgy is the gospel, followed by the sermon. Then we all rise together and offer prayers, and as I said above, on the conclusion of our prayer, bread is brought and wine and water. And the president similarly offers up prayer. So bread is brought and wine and water. This is the great entrance. that we do when the priest walks through. We don't go around the whole church; we just go around the front. But it's symbolically reenacting the fact. It was symbolically reenacting a lot of things, but part of it was that bread and wine were kept separately in a secret location, and then during the liturgy, because again, hidden underground. And then they were ceremonially and with great solemnity brought in. So even though now we no longer have to keep the bread and wine in a separate location, we do process them in the same way they did in the ancient church. And the president similarly, and we do offer it with water too, actually. And
where's the water in the ceremony, or like in the?
So it's when I prepare the gifts. I pour water. I say one of the so I'm cutting up the bread, and I say one of the soldiers pierced his side with a lance, and I stab my lance into the bread, and immediately came out blood, and I put water in and water, and then I put a little bit of water. And he who saw it is borne witness, and his witness is true. Blessed is the union of your holy gifts, always now and ever into the ages of ages. Amen. So yeah, it's cool. The proscomi V, it happens hidden. You guys don't see that, but it is a cool service. We can get into at some point. And the president similarly offers up prayers and thanksgiving, literally Eucharists, like the word in Greek, Evcharisto, it's thank you, to the best of his power, and the people assent with Amen. Then follows the distribution of the Eucharistic gifts and the partaking of them by all, and they're sent to the absent by the hands of the deacon. So that is our first description of a divine liturgy we ever have from the year 150. It starts with the gospel, sermon, prayers, great entrance, communion, and then dismissal. So again, the skeleton is there. It becomes more or less elaborate depending on your circumstances, but everything is already in place by 150. The church is first and foremost a worshiping community gathered around the table of her Lord, offering to him in sacrifice the substance of her life on earth, bread and wine, and receiving these gifts back from him as the body and blood of Christ. St. Nicholas Cabasilas sums up the importance of the church's worship. It appears, therefore, that to worship God in spirit and truth, and to offer him pure homage, is an effect of the holy table. From this mystery, therefore, we obtain the gift of being Christ's members and thus being like him. While we were dead, it was impossible to offer homage to the living God. But unless we constantly feast at the banquet, it is impossible to be alive and be released from dead works. Just as God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth, so that it is fitting that those who choose to worship the living one should themselves be living, for as he says, he is not the God of the dead, but of the living. Matthew 22:32. So that's why I used to do Orthodoxy 101. I used to do this class on Tuesdays, and I got very good advice that really it can't be that way. You have to come to church. You have to get that experience. You have to get that grace. Again, even if you don't understand what's going on, and then you come here and then you learn about what just happened. It has to be part of the presence of God, affected through prayer and worship, has to be part of your development and your growth. Okay, so that's part 3. We're about to hit part 4, and that'll be that. Are there any questions about part 3, which is right worship? Yes.
I was just going to comment that when Father Sam took me and Raven under catechumen classes, I prefer it this way, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
He had to put a separate time to do it, and I have more of an experience coming to liturgy and then coming and doing this. And I've already been through this class before,
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, this is the only way I would do it.
Great. Well, I'm happy to hear that. I appreciate, because you do. I mean, the point of the liturgy, if nothing else, is to just change the way you think and you feel just by being there, and hopefully you carry that with you not just on Sunday but through the rest of your week. But at very least, that memory, that experience is most in you from
Homily is not a required portion of the liturgy, is it? So sometimes you don't have homilies.
Yeah, in practice, often you don't have homilies. I have been with bishops before who say you have to do a homily at every single one. It is part of the liturgy. So in practice, you'll especially like for a minor weekday service or at like a monastery or something, maybe you won't get a homily. But there's some who are of the opinion, no, even if it's a 2-minute little tidbit, you have to say something. So there's a bit of a disagreement on that. It's a good question. Okay, and number 4, true sanctity. So historical continuity, apostolic doctrine, and right worship are all central to the claim of the Orthodox Church to be the authentic Church of Christ. These elements mean little, however, if lives are not changed, if men and women are not conformed to the image of Christ. In other words, the proof is in the final product. This is what made me Orthodox. The other 3 above points were important and they're valuable, but this last one is is what sealed the deal for me. Archimandrite Basilius of the Iviron Monastery on Mount Athos writes, in the same way, faithfulness to the tradition and dogmatic teaching of the Church means not only that the right formulations of terms are not altered, but also that our lives are altered and renewed by the power of the truth and regenerative power latent in those terms. Then man acquires senses and is able to see. He becomes conscious of the deeper meaning and value of the Orthodox faith as a force. Since the first century, the Orthodox Church has produced countless thousands of true saints. It is important to note, however, that a saint is not simply a nice moral person. And that's what I was commenting about Mother Teresa. If you read about the life of Mother Teresa, it sounds like she was a nice moral person. It sounds like she did really great things. But that seems to be the extent of it. And that seems to be the extent of most people who are proclaimed as saints in the Catholic Church or whatever. It is not necessary to be a Christian in order to be a moral, upstanding citizen. Mormons are some of the nicest, most moral people you could ever meet, but they're not Christians. He does not pull punches. A saint, on the other hand, is one whose life has been totally transformed by the uncreated grace of the Holy Trinity to the likeness of the Son of God. St. Nectarius of Pendopolis was born to a poor Greek family, but quickly rose to the rank of metropolitan in the Church of Alexandria, Egypt. Known for his strict asceticism and love for the poor and downtrodden, he was well loved by the common people. This, however, aroused great jealousy on the part of the other clerics in the Patriarchate. They embarked on a smear campaign against him, and he was fired from his position. Even after he returned to Greece, his enemies did not leave him alone, stirring up trouble and false allegations against him wherever he went. St. Nectarius is one of the greatest saints of the last 100-ish years of the Church. They made a movie about him recently called Man of God. Our friend Nectari took his name in baptism. Really, really great. But you're going to learn a little bit about him. After many years at the helm of the Rosario School in Athens, he moved to the island of Aegina and founded a women's monastery. Even in old age, however, his enemies did not leave him alone. He continued to have problems with church officials, and at one point he was visited by a civil prosecutor who made the absurd claim that he was keeping a harem and dumping the bodies of his bastard children down a well. Unfortunately, that was the accusation against him. So he was raided by the police, and they searched the whole body for dead infants because he was just leading a monastery, this holy woman united in prayer. But he was vindicated. Okay, it came out that it was untrue, and you see in the movie and if you read the book about why that is. But it's still horrible things they put him through.
The things that they put the women through were crazy.
Yeah.
The interviews and stuff they were supposedly.
Yeah, so you'll get that if you read the story of St. Nectarius or you watch the movie Man of God. Through all these trials and persecutions, however, God was redlining the soul of his servant as refining the soul of his servant as gold is purified in a fire. St. Nectarius became so humble, so utterly dependent on his Creator, that the uncreated grace of God literally overflowed his frail body. He was known to be clairvoyant, and many sought his prayers, knowing that the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. James 5:16. St. Nectarius died in an Athens hospital in 1920. The nun and nurse who were attending him removed his woolen undershirt and carelessly tossed it on the bed of a paralytic. The paralyzed man immediately stood up and began praising God. That sounds like something out of the New Testament. Sounds like something you read. That was 1920. That was after we already had, some cars and phones and stuff. The next day, the first public viewing of his body, the crowd was amazed to see that his face was exuding a sweet-smelling myrrh. And now, at this point in time, I'm going to end the recording because I have something to say that I don't want to say on recording. If you want to find out what it is, come to class.